Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Bill Jeffway. I'm the Executive Director of the Dutchess County Historical Society, and thank you for coming to our monthly program. And I'm particularly happy that this month's program sponsor is CR Properties, again, because they are a regular and longtime supporter. And we're actually working with them at the moment to develop a short video profile of the historic cast iron building where their offices are located. So that's something else to look forward to. So thank you to CR Properties again and Tom Cervone for this continued support so we can bring these programs at no cost to you. Michael Boden needs no introduction perhaps, but he's a board director at the Historical Society, professor at Dutchess County Community College, of course, a veteran himself. And what I love about his research is it's very much on the ground. And I know he's just come back from scouting this particular battlefield, and his research is always extraordinary. So I'm just going to get out of the way and allow Dr. Michael Boden to take it away.
All right. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. You know, very soon here, I'm going to put on the slides. You don't want to have to look at my ugly face anymore, but I want to start off with a few thank yous before we get going. And I want to start off first and foremost with all of you who are taking a time out of a very pleasant evening toward the end of summer. We're all busy to take the time out and support the Historical Society to come out and watch this presentation. It means a lot to all of us who work with the Society to have that level of support. I would also really like to thank Tom Cervone and CR Properties for sponsoring. As Bill said, he's been a longtime sponsor and supporter of the Society. You know, I was honored last year when CR Properties supported my program, the month of my programming on the Battle of Haversborough. And Tom's come back and supported this program as well. And now I'm humbled. And so, Tom, thank you so much for all you do for all of us. Really appreciate it. A good friend of mine from County Players had a quote the other day about working at County Players, and I want to use it because that's another thank you I have to give. And he says, "What the work we are doing today, we're standing on the shoulders of giants." And there's a lot of people who I could not have done this work with because I did not come to the Shenandoah Valley being an expert in this aspect of the Civil War. So to Bill Jeffway, who does so much work at the Historical Society to help me find the materials and resources they have there, to Melody Moore, who does such an incredible job with the collections at the Historical Society, organizing them, cataloging them, again, going out and finding them, absolutely amazing. To some people that I have never met that have done work to make my job easier with this. There was a longtime supporter of the Historical Society, a gentleman by the name of Dean Thomas, who did a lot of work prepping the 128th, studying for the 128th New York Volunteer Infantry. There's 4 boxes of stuff that Dean donated to the Society. That trove of information has been immensely valuable to my research. There's a number of historians out there. I got a word of encouragement from Jonathan Noyalis, who is at the University of Shenandoah University, in charge of the McCormick Civil War Institute. And I have relied heavily on his work for a lot of my my tertiary source, my scholarly source preparation. Thank you to all of them. When I was down visiting the battlefields, the park staff are absolutely amazing. Just fantastic to see them. And I think the last people I have to thank are my wonderful wife, Connie, and my dad. My parents have always been supportive of me. I don't think my dad is able to be on tonight, but you know, he's watching from back in Nebraska. But Connie puts up with me going to cemeteries, going to battlefields, and does it with wonderful humor. So I love you. Thank you. I'm looking at her right now on the screen. So she's smiling. Thank you. So with that, I'll get started. And I guess I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit here too. Before I turn on the, sorry, I'm playing with my screen. Before I turn on the slides. Why the Shenandoah Valley? Why did I decide to do this particular series of battles? And there's really one reason, and I'm going to show a couple pictures that sort of lead into this in a moment, but it has to, well, you know what? Let me go ahead and start it. See, that's a danger. I end up talking to myself while I'm doing this as well. I don't know why I did that. Give me a second before I save my screen, okay? This is me having some technical difficulties. And okay. All right, can everybody see the screen now? I think, Bill, can you see it? Is it up on your side? Okay, thank you. Here's why the Shenandoah kind of sticks in my mind. And I'm going to start it with the question of monuments. And we're going to be coming back to monuments a couple times in our discussion. What folks are seeing, I know these are familiar to a lot of folks here in the Hudson Valley, but on the left is the Rhinebeck Cemetery that has a wonderfully moving Civil War monument there. And if you look on the bottom of that statue, there are inscribed the names of Port Hudson and Cedar Creek. I chose those particularly, Cedar Creek, because that's one of the battles we're going to be looking at. Port Hudson, because the units that we're talking about were also at Port Hudson. I would love to do a future discussion about the siege and battle at Port Hudson, which occurred in the summer of 1863 on the Mississippi River. To give you an idea of where those battles ranked, the other two sides of this four-sided monument, the battles that are listed there are Gettysburg and Antietam, two battles that I think every one of us knows. That gives you the idea of where folks who were memorializing the Civil War in Dutchess County, where they placed Cedar Creek and Port Hudson, particularly Cedar Creek and actions in the Shenandoah. And then on the right-hand side, you see a monument in Poughkeepsie, a little bit overgrown right now, but it's a monument to the 128th New York Volunteer Infantry Regiment, a regiment made up of about half soldiers from Dutchess County. One side of that monument is dedicated to fighting in the Shenandoah Valley in the summer of 1864. The emphasis that is given in terms of memorialization is what first brought me to the question of Dutchess County and the Shenandoah Valley. There's this campaign, we're specifically going to be talking about Sheridan's Army of the Shenandoah fighting Jubal Early's Army of the Valley. This is October of 1864 to, August of 1864 to October of 1864. Those 2 months only. Not really going to be looking at anything else that is happening in the Valley. And that's kind of a shame because the Shenandoah Valley is so rich in history. I spent 3 days there looking at just these small battles that I'm going to be, these small number of battles that I'm going to be talking about. And we are going to see that there's just so much more there in the Valley to even look at. I need to spend 3 months there, not just 3 days. It was a dynamic campaign. Much different than last year. If you were with us for when I did when I studied the Battle of Aversboro, that was a fairly straightforward battle. We had one Dutchess County involved regiment, the Dutchess County Regiment. It was a single battle and it progressed rather linearly. In other words, the North started, they launched an attack, and they eventually won the battle. The campaign we're looking at has ebbs and flows. There's constant movement up and down the Shenandoah Valley. And I should also mention that up the valley means south and down the valley means north. It's based on the flow of the Shenandoah River. There's a mix of units from Dutchess County that have involvement. We're going to be looking at 4 in particular, and they have an incredibly wide variety of experiences, ranging from dizzying success to, in one case, unmitigated disaster. So these are challenges that we face when looking at Dutchess County in the Shenandoah. There's also a different collection of primary source documents. There's nothing like, in our collection at the Historical Society, there's nothing like the Titus papers for the 150th. where you can look and see month to month daily duty rosters, battle reports, ammunition expenditures, all sorts of things from Bravo Company 150th. There's not that degree of things. Dean Thomas, in the decades that he studied the 120th, collected a large range of primary source documents and facsimiles and transcriptions of primary source documents that he has given to the Historical Society, but it's a different type of information to gather. The last thing about the Shenandoah that makes it interesting is there's a lot of similarities to the Hudson River Valley where we're at. You have a series of communities that were originated and formed their lifeblood along a very significant waterway. You have a tremendous amount of different types of history, in both cases ranging from the Revolutionary War to the present. The Shenandoah is also famous for being the birthplace of Patsy Cline, for example, among many other things. So I found the Shenandoah a very fascinating place to look at. Now, when we get into the study, I'll be honest, and I know there's some experts out there in the Shenandoah, and I'm going to offer my apologies at the beginning, because we are not going to go into depth into all of the campaigns or all of the battles. There's just too much to look at. So for purposes of our discussion, I'm going to be looking at two things. First of all, I'm going to be looking at 3 battles and 3 battles only. We're going to be looking at the third battle of Winchester, which occurred on the 19th of September, 1864. We're going to be looking at the Battle of Fisher's Hill, 22 September, and we're going to be looking at the Battle of Cedar Creek on the 19th of October. There's a lot that happened other than those battles. We are not really going to be looking at Tom's Brook. I will mention it was a big cavalry fight on the 9th. I'm not going to be discussing the myriad number of small skirmishes that occurred as well. And even within those battles, I am only going to, glance upon units that were not affiliated with Dutchess County. So there are going to be some things, it's going to be somewhat imbalanced. I will, of course, give an overview of the entire battle, but then we're going to drill down on those Dutchess County areas. I'm also going to stay focused on 4 units and 4 units only, because these are the units that have the most significant Dutchess County connections. And I've got a picture of their battle flags up on the screen. The only little caveat I'll give is the 6th New York Cavalry. That is a end of war battle flag that was given to them as a veteran regiment after they re-enlisted in late 1864. So you can see some of the names of the over here on this side of the flag, some of the names of the battles we're going to be looking at: Fisher's Hill, Winchester, etc. Of these, we're probably all most familiar with the 128th of New York, and that's the one that we're going to talk about the most. Just a little bit of history about the 128th. Its nickname was the Old Steady Regiment. It was formed in September of 1862 in response to Abraham Lincoln calling for an additional 300,000 troops to fight against the Confederacy. This is in the early fall after a series of disappointing defeats for the Union forces during the summer and spring. It was raised primarily in Columbia and Dutchess counties. Matter of fact, 6 of the companies were from Dutchess County, 4 of the companies were raised in Columbia County. There was a split in terms of where the companies were raised from. They really kind of went all over. One thing, there were some trends. C Company was primarily up in Rhinebeck and in the northern part of the county. D Company was primarily out of Poughkeepsie. I Company was out of Poughkeepsie, but most of the others were from all over the place. B Company and E Company were from all over the county. And so you had a mix of folks. The regiment went to Washington, D.C. for about 3 months in late 62, but in January of 1863 was sent to Louisiana and spent 1.5 years in Louisiana fighting in the Port Hudson campaign, fighting as part of Nathaniel Banks's Red River campaign, the latter of which did not really end too well. and then returned for the Shenandoah campaign as part of a general repositioning of forces. Specifically, General Grant was running out of troops fighting against Lee and needed to find them from somewhere. The 128th was a part of William Emery's 19th Corps, and it was being brought to Virginia to fight with Grant. The 159th New York is one that doesn't get as much attention. It was a regiment, in terms of timeline, it's very similar to the 120th. It was called at the same time in September of 62. It was formed, though, headquartered in Brooklyn. But I'm going to read a quote from the regimental history of the 159th, and it says, "Men did not come forward as at the commencement of the war, and though liberal bounties in money were offered and paid, the regiment progressed but slowly." In other words, nobody down in the city wanted to enlist in the 159th. They didn't want to enlist. So in the later part of the fall, the 159th was given the ability to start recruiting outside of the city, specifically in Dutchess and Columbia counties, which is where about half of the soldiers came from. Specifically, the A, C, E, G, and I companies, 5 of the 10, came from Dutchess and Columbia counties, all over the county. There wasn't really a specific city that was in place, though there are a fair number of soldiers from Fishkill in that regiment. Excuse me. One thing that's kind of funny about the 159th, its nickname is the 2nd Dutchess and Columbia Regiment. What's the 1st Dutchess and Columbia Regiment? Well, the short answer is there isn't one. There is a 1st Dutchess Regiment, which is the 150th, though it's better known as the Dutchess County Regiment. And there is a 1st Columbia Regiment, which is the 91st New York. So the 159th was called the 2nd Dutchess and Columbus Regiment. The last 2 regiments that I want to talk about, and we will talk about these much more briefly. The 6th New York Cavalry was a regiment raised in 1861 from all over the state. 2 company, and they were called companies, not troops at the time. 2 companies in particular came from Dutchess County. F Company came from, F Company came from the town of Poughkeepsie primarily. H Company came, a great deal of soldiers came from Dover. And I actually have a story later on. We're going to talk about the 6th Cav and a Dover connection. And they fought in 143 engagements throughout the war, very highly decorated, pretty much in every major battle and campaign fought by the Army of the Potomac. They have a monument at Gettysburg to the 6th New York. The 5th New York Heavy Artillery is an interesting animal. Heavy artillery regiments were designed to be fortress troops. An artillery regiment was designed to handle big guns, not the cannons that can be pulled around the battlefields. We're talking, monster cannons, parrots that were mounted on the walls of defensive systems to blast enemy ships out of the water or defeat large formations of enemies, of the enemy. They typically were about twice the size of an infantry regiment. Infantry regiments were authorized about 1,000 men. Which is about what the 128th and 129th mustered in. Heavy artillery regiments, about 1,800. The 5th New York Heavy Artillery had 3 battalions, each of which contained about 400 men. And those battalions rotated between positions. Some of them were at Washington, D.C., some of them were at Harper's Ferry, some of them were on garrison duty. At the time of the Shenandoah campaign, one of those 3 battalions, the 2nd Battalion, was in the field campaigning with Sheridan. That 2nd Battalion had 2 of its 4 companies recruited in Dutchess, F Company and H Company. Both of them recruited from all over. The H Company was more Poughkeepsie than anywhere else, but they were recruited all over. Now, that's not saying that all members of those companies came from Dutchess County, but there was a substantial amount. So that's who we're going to be looking at. Now, as we move on, I want to very briefly talk about the strategic situation at the beginning of this campaign. This will be a very brief slide. You're looking at a standard map of May 1864. And the way it worked was that Ulysses S. Grant, the commander of the all federal armies, decided he wanted to coordinated attacks throughout the southern states against the Confederacy to stretch them thin so they couldn't use their interior lines to reinforce their armies elsewhere. The main effort would be made by the Army of the Potomac, a close secondary effort by General Sherman going to Atlanta. And then you had three other subsidiary campaigns: Franz Sigel going in the Shenandoah Valley, Benjamin Butler, Bermuda 100 going up to Richmond from the eastern coast of the Atlantic, and Nathaniel Banks trying to take Mobile. Within a few weeks in May of 1864, Sigel, Butler, and Banks got nowhere. They were either defeated or they just didn't do anything, which wasn't meeting what Grant's intent was. Grant was involved in this overland campaign approaching Richmond against Lee that was turning into a bloodbath, costing tens of thousands of men killed and wounded over the course of a few weeks. General Lee knew all of this was happening. And so in June of 1864, he made the decision that he was going to take a risk. He was going to send Jubal Early and one of the three infantry corps of the Army of Northern Virginia into the Shenandoah Valley. And he had two basic missions for Early. Number one was to raid Washington and make it so that Grant had to send troops away from his army to stop Early. The idea is, hey, we've already beaten Sigel in the valley. Now, if we can make it worse, if we can threaten Washington, maybe Grant will be forced to lose a bunch of men. We know he's had a bunch of costly battles so far, and I can engage in a campaign against him. Second one, grab as much military equipment and supplies as you can to send back to Richmond. Protect the valley as a breadbasket of the Confederacy. Excuse me. And these were Early's charges. And so he left for the valley in June. By July, he is outside the gates of Washington, D.C., and Grant was forced to send troops to Washington. He sent the 6th Army Corps, which was one of the Army Corps that had been with the Army of the Potomac for a long time, a veteran corps. And he also dispatched the 8th Army Corps, which was in Louisiana, getting ready to join him in Virginia, dispatched that Army Corps to, excuse me, I said the 8th, I misspoke. The 19th Army Corps, I'm getting my corps mixed up. The 19th Army Corps, which was in Louisiana, send that to Washington as well. The 19th Corps is where the 128th and the 159th Infantry were at. By the time we get to early August, we have a situation strategically that is and here's where I'm going to start talking about the operational context. Early had basically accomplished what Lee wanted him to do. He had embarrassed Lincoln and the North in general. He had cleared the valley, ensured stable logistics for a period of time. He caused the diversion of these 2 Army Corps from Grant to the valley, and he had caused political chaos in Washington, D.C. All of this was exactly what Lee wanted. Grant understood the significance of the Shenandoah Valley politically. He made the decision to reorganize all of the different agencies and departments and armies and corps and garrisons and whatever you have into one army, one department under Philip Sheridan. Phil Sheridan was given command of 3 Army Corps, the 6th, the 19th, both of whom I've already mentioned, and the 8th, which the 8th was a collection of all of the different garrison units from the Shenandoah region, from West Virginia, under the command of George Crook, and the 5th New York Heavy Artillery was part of that organization. Sheridan also asked for some cavalry. He was sent a division of cavalry under First William Averill, and then later made Brigadier General Torbert. The 6th New York Cavalry was part of that organization as well. And from there, what we ended up having a situation was where Sheridan ended up with a group of about 45,000 men going against Early, who had at the beginning of the campaign about 14,000 men. That gets us into the campaign itself. The first, I'm going to rush over this very quickly because, I just mentioned in August, early August, Sheridan is ready to go on his campaign. The Third Battle of Winchester didn't occur until the 19th of September. A lot of stuff happened in between those two dates, but the net result is the two armies sort of ended up where they started, which was basically on the Virginia-West Virginia border. There was a lot of movement back and forth. Finally, in the middle of September, Early decided to divide his forces, and he sent 2 of his 4 infantry brigades on a mission to the north to try to capture supplies, maybe catch Sheridan napping. And he left the other 2 brigades further south by the town of Winchester. Sheridan saw an opportunity and decided that he was going to destroy the southern 2 brigades of Early. And the way he was going to do this was going to be a frontal attack. And that leads us to the 19th of September and the first battle of Winchester, or Third Battle of Winchester. This gives you an idea of where the battlefields we're going to be talking about are located at. This is just a Google map. Winchester, Strasburg, and the 3 battlefields. This is roughly about 20 to 25 miles inside of this circle. It's roughly an hour from Washington, D.C., about an hour from Hagerstown, Maryland. Antietam battlefield is right here. Harper's Ferry is right here, right along the I-81 corridor. Interstate 81 literally passes directly through all 3 of these battles, disrupting each of the battlefield preservation efforts. So we get ready for the Third Battle of Winchester on the 19th of September. This is the general plan. The problem Sheridan had is to attack the lone division of Early's that was in this location, which happened to be Ramseur's division. Attack them frontally. He had to pass everybody through, it's colloquial called the Gorge. It's a crossing on the Opequon Creek, and it's very, very narrow. So narrow, in fact, this is a picture that was taken. It's difficult to really get a sense of this, but you can kind of see in the background that there are hills and that the road over here on the far left is going through a cut. That cut lasts about a mile or 2 miles. You can see it when you drive through it. It's really a choke point. This picture was taken by a member of the 159th, Captain William Francis Tiemann. He's also the author of the 159th's regimental history. He took the picture during a visit in 1888. He was also captured at this battle as well. But this is a choke point. And the way that the federal troops pushed through the gorge just delayed this crossing. Sheridan wanted to attack early in the morning, but it wasn't until about noon that all of the units got through and were able to set up. That delay allowed Early to call back 2 other divisions, Gordon and Rhodes. And again, this is a very basic map. The movements were a little bit more complex than what I'm showing. In the absence of time, though, this is what the battle lines looked like at about 12 o'clock when the first attacks were initially going in. What you see here is the southern part of the battlefield. These 3 divisions in green, or excuse me, in green and blue are the 6th Corps. We're going to spend the next few minutes talking about what's happening here, which is where some horrible fighting was going on involving the 19th Corps, which was where the 128th and 159th were. This map depicts the initial attack positions of Cuvier-Grover's division. In the initial attack, the 128th, which was in 2nd Brigade, was in the first line. The 3rd Brigade, the 159th, was in that 2nd Brigade. And they launched an attack against John Gordon's Georgia troops from something called the First Woods, which, guess what? It's a wooded area, across the middle field, which doesn't have any trees in it, to an area called the Second Woods, which at the time of the battle was another wooded area. It's no longer as wooded. But they launched an attack and achieved initial success. However, Gordon was able, due to a number of issues within the attacking unit, these 4 brigades ended up very dispersed, and they were separated from the 6th Corps. Gordon was able to counterattack and break apart the fight, break apart the attack of the 128th and 129th, or 159th. Now, this was proportionately the bloodiest fighting that occurred at that position. Grover's brigade lost over 1,500 men, those 4 little lines you see there. The 128th lost 7 killed and 70 wounded. The 159th lost 10 killed, 53 wounded, and 20 prisoners. In both cases, they went into the battle with about 350 to 400 men. In other words, the 128th and the 159th lost about a quarter to a third of their men in this fight for the middle field. And again, I'm just showing a couple quick lines. There were actually a couple cases of moving back and forth across the middle field. There were, however, other troops coming in to assist. The 2nd Division of the 19th Corps came, met Gordon's division, basically established a status quo. Until about 1300, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the 8th Corps finally made it through the gorge over the Opequon, which is about right here, moved up and launched an attack around the side. We're going to talk more about this attack in a minute, because this is where the 5th New York Heavy Artillery was. There was a 2nd Division that launched an attack on the other side of this creek right here called Red Bud Run. So this is kind of where the battle is starting. Now, and as I mentioned, this was, there was a lot of, it was a rough time. Where's my quote here? Okay, we'll move beyond that. This was, if you read the reports of the battle, this fight was really traumatic for the 128th. Most of it took place over the field that you see in front of you. This is the middle field, looking at it from what was the 1st Woods to what was the 2nd Woods, with the middle field in the middle. The 2 monuments you see here, this is the Alabama monument, and you can't quite make it out in the trees, but over here is the Maine monument. The Maine monument down here is looking back toward the Alabama monument, which is, I'm sorry, it's right in here. This direction is east, back taken from the west. This is the ground that was fought over so tenaciously by the 128th and 159th. The commander of the 159th, who would go on to become the brigade commander, drew a schematic map that showed the positions of the units. The 159th was taken from about where I had the last photograph taken from, the bottom right one. That's about where the 159th was on the map of the commander. After that fight, the battle's pretty much over for the 159th and 128th. They're pretty much hors de combat. They are ineffective. Grover's division stays in the rear while other units continue the attack. Those other units from about 3 o'clock on, I forgot I added that little bit in there. The Confederates are able to beat back a number of these attacks with a battery of 6 cannon placed here. I've got pictures of that location, into this tree line, which wouldn't have been quite as thick, but the Federals were attacking from left to right, and 6 cannon can do a lot of damage into these woods. Red Bud Run causes a lot of problem for Duvall's division. There's a funny story about one of Duvall's brigade commanders that rode into this river, this body of water, trying to get his troops across, and he got stuck. His horse got stuck, and the Confederates are firing at him. So he got off of his horse, and he got stuck even worse. And when he finally got pulled out, he left his boots inside the mud at the bottom of Red Bud Run. The name of that commander, Rutherford B. Hayes, future president of the United States. But his troops got a laugh out of it at the time. The 5th New York Heavy Artillery is in the middle of this line. There are coordinated attacks along the line. The Confederate cannon retreat. By 1700, you have a situation where the Federal line is fairly united. Again, the 5th New York is right in the middle of the fighting. I have not added them on the map, but Grover and Dwight are back over here. Those units, the 128th, the 159th, they are still not in this fight. And they launch a coordinated attack against the Confederates, along with a massive cavalry charge in which the 6th New York is in the center. One historian, a gentleman by the name of Brandon Beck, says that this charge by the Federal cavalry, 4 brigades right here, this charge, 6,000 men, was the largest cavalry charge of the Civil War. And they charged, and the combination of all of these attacks defeated the Confederates and broke them. They ended up defeated and retreating south out of Winchester. That is a very quick rundown of the third Winchester. Now, what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking about some of the Dutchess County soldiers that fought there. There's a couple of interesting stories. First of all, these are pictures of Fort Collier, which is has a lot of not monuments, a lot of signboards for the cavalry fight. The commander of the 128th was at the time Major Francis Keyes, who used to command Charlie Company from Rhinebeck. He was wounded. The official history of the 128th talks about the fight. Comparatively few men fell until we were within 100 yards of the rebel line, when the enemy poured upon us a most deadly volley of musket balls and grape and canister. Major Keyes, who had command of the 128th, had been wounded and taken from the field. The Rhinebeck Gazette, 2 weeks later, posted a short article of his return back to Rhinebeck to recuperate, and talked about his wound made just below the left shoulder blade. I had to throw something in here about the 5th New York. I won't say I had to throw something in, but I wanted to for a couple of reasons. Number one, the 5th New York Heavy Artillery, for the first time under fire and losing quite heavily, they actually only lost about a dozen men, losing quite heavily, moved forward with alacrity and well. And yes, that's not a misspelling. It's not alacrity and will. It is alacrity and well, according to the brigade commander, Colonel Wells. Keep this quote in mind as we move forward and talk about Cedar Creek. I have found this veteran. This is taken in the Ironwood Cemetery up in Millerton, of Private Martin C. Palmer. Some of the regimental records call him Palmer, who was in F Company of the 5th New York Heavy Artillery. His records from the New York State Adjutant's General Office say that he was wounded on the 13th of September and then discharged with a disability. From what I've been able to tell from the official records, as well as from some other sources I'm looking at, the 5th New York didn't lose any casualties on the 13th of September. I'm wondering whether, and this is a question that I don't have an answer to. Bill Jeffway told me a while back when I was talking about some of the challenges here, the study of history doesn't always lead to answers, but to better questions. This might be one of those better questions. I wonder whether he was actually wounded at the Battle of Third Winchester, because the date doesn't seem to quite fit. But this gentleman is buried up in Millerton. Okay, I love this story. This is great. This is a gentleman from Tivoli, Louis Cashdollar, resident of Tivoli. Now, first thing, when you look at this guy, I showed this picture to my wife, and she was like, "Oh, he's cute." I was like, "He's kind of got a Michael Fassbender look going on there." But Louis Cashdollar was perhaps the largest man in Dutchess. This is from an account from 1897. He is a one-legged veteran who served in the 128th Veteran, 6'7", 370 pounds, 66 inches around the waist, 63 around the chest, 22 around the neck. This is a big dude. Where did he lose his leg? He lost his leg at 3rd Winchester. He lost his leg in the fight in the middle field that I was just talking about. The two other things that are interesting, this is his gravestone in the cemetery up in Tivoli. And it's still very close to the road. You can actually see it from the road as you're driving past. But the other thing that's interesting is in the collection of the Historical Society, we have a number of documents. Now, I haven't broken all of them out, but it's a series of 6 documents that basically show his wife filing for a widow's pension. The first document, the one in the very back, is him basically giving an affidavit to say, yeah, I've only got a leg. I was wounded in the war. The other ones are his wife from in 1905, 1906, basically saying, hey, my husband died. Cash Dollar died in 1905. It's her document saying, hey, he died. These are all my attributions. I need to get his widow's pension. Did she get it? Well, she did, because this final document over here is saying, New York City, we need to stop the pension paying to Adelia Cash Dollar because she passed away in 1908. So just another one of those little stories about one of the soldiers that fought there. Moving, I can see I'm getting a little bit long on time, so I'm going to go through Fisher's Hill fairly quickly. Fisher's Hill was the second battle to talk about. It was fought south of Strasburg. Early's retreating forces set up on the most defensible part of the Shenandoah Valley. It's called the Gibraltar of the Shenandoah. Part of the reason is because it's the part of the Shenandoah where it's at its narrowest, 3.9 miles. A series of low hills, and the troops were arrayed similar to this. Excuse me. Again, the 128th was involved in clearing some rifle pits and received a number of very fine remarks. The main attack came from Crook's 8th Corps. It came about 4 o'clock in the afternoon after he had engaged in a flank march, literally up the side of the mountain and back down to the flank. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Union launched a massive attack, which the Confederates were unable to stop, and they went into a large retreat. Again, I'm going through this very quickly. The thing I wanted to highlight here is mostly about the 128th. I should mention the 5th New York was in the second line of Thoburn's division, continuing to fight and fought well. But the 128th started their attack from about this position, which is a little bit about right here on the map. And they attacked toward those low hills in front of you in that picture. This is a picture from the defensive lines of the Confederates. Molyneux's map. Forgive me going through it quickly. I'm just going to leave this up here for a minute. One of the things that struck me is the 128th was not involved in this battle to a tremendous degree. The number of soldiers that were lost by the 128th were just a handful, less than 10. But they were praised specifically by the Corps commander, the brigade commander, not only their brigade, the division commander, not only their commander, their brigade commander on the bottom, but by the neighboring brigade commander, Colonel Molyneux, who commanded the brigade that the 159th was in. All of these folks had fabulous things to say about the 128th. They captured this line of rifle pits, bullpens, and then they repulsed 2 Confederate counterattacks that were attacking downhill with excellent artillery support to try to take them back, and the 128th stopped them. Tremendously successful. Over the next few weeks, the papers, both in Rhinebeck and Poughkeepsie, had a number of praiseworthy articles about the events in the valley. But there were soldiers that were captured. This is a rather long letter. Again, this is part of the Dean Thomas collection. It's a transcription of a letter. This is a soldier from Company H, from Fishkill, Charles Weller. writing to his parents about how he got captured. He stopped during the fight in the Third Battle of Winchester to offer a comrade who had been wounded a drink. He waited too long, and he got captured. Now, our boys took 3,000 of them. No, they didn't get 3,000 of them. It was more like about 1,200, but a little hyperbole never hurt. I wanted to focus on this letter, or at least bring up this letter, because I've got a couple other slides where I am going to talk some more about captured soldiers, because prisoners of war were a big deal. And perhaps nowhere more, another one of these unanswered questions, than in Dover. On the left is the grave of Private Robert Buris from H Troop 6 New York Cavalry. He was enlisted on the 23rd of September in 1861. He was discharged on the 21st of October. His gravestone is almost illegible, and it's alone. If you look at the cemetery, I took a picture from a distance back, and there's one lone marker next to his that is illegible. I cannot read it. I could not read it to see who was on it. And the thing I find interesting about Robert Buris is another one of these unanswered questions. Robert Buris enlisted on the 23rd of September. He was 23 years old. 1 week later, on the 30th of September, two other Burises enlisted. Albert, who was 19, and Zachariah, who was 20. They're the only Burises in the 6th New York Cavalry. They're all from Dover. I got to think they're brothers, with the eldest enlisting first. The two younger brothers, both re-enlisted in 1863. Both of them were captured in the Shenandoah Valley. We don't know exactly when Albert was captured. Zachariah was captured on the, Oh, I'm sorry. I have it backwards. Albert was captured on August 13th, which is in some of the earliest movements of Sheridan's army. So we don't know when Zachariah was captured, but we do know that both of them died in a Confederate prison camp by the end of the war. And both of them are buried in unmarked graves, or in the one mass grave that is located at the Salisbury National Cemetery in North Carolina. And that's a picture from the VA of the cemetery down there. So yes, Debbie, do you have a question? I thought I saw somebody with a question. Oh, that's okay. We'll come back to it here in a minute. Okay, moving on. If I can be smarter than my computer screen. Now, we come to our last battle, the Battle of Cedar Creek. This is sort of the culmination of the campaign. After Fisher's Hill, Sheridan went on a push up the valley against Early's forces, and also to execute something called the Burning, where he destroyed everything in a 70 by 30 mile area, burning thousands of barns, taking 50,000 head of livestock, basically making the Shenandoah Valley unlivable. But by doing so, he basically removed his ability to sustain his army off the land. So he withdrew down the valley to the north, and he ended up back in Strasburg, basically just a mile or two north of the old Fisher's Creek battlefield, where he went into camp while the army of Shenandoah figured out what they were going to do next. The general consensus was that the Confederates are done. Early is not going to do anything goofy. Well, Early decided to do something goofy on the morning of the 19th of 19 October. And this is the southern end of the battlefield. This is a battlefield that stretches far to the north of where we're at, but the Dutchess County connection took place here. This is the southernmost portion of the Federal position. On the morning of the 19th, the 5th New York Heavy Artillery is in the furthest skirmish line possible to the south, guarding fords across both Cedar Creek and the Shenandoah River. About a mile or two to their north is Grover's division of the 19th Corps that has the 128th in a picket position at the very corner of their line. The 159th is further to the north. And in the night of the 19th, Early had decided that he's going to make a gamble, and he's going to send his army on a nighttime march around the Union's left flank, basically crossing at these two fords, and to try to throw the dice and see if he can roll up the Federal army. And it just about works. Early in the morning, the division of Joseph Kershaw, which had been detached from Lee to support Early, attacked across Bowman Mills Ford. At about the same time, Gordon began his movement across the river. Now, the commander of the 5th New York Heavy Artillery, a guy by the name of Frederick Wilkie, Captain Wilkie, he, over the night, his skirmishers were like, there's something going on. There is something happening. He sent word back to his higher command saying something is going on, and nobody paid attention to him. Within 15 minutes, the 5th New York Heavy Artillery, out of the 350 men they had going into the battle, 309 of them were captured. Almost the entire regiment, all but 41 men. Gordon went on to set up his divisions in such a fashion, which really kind of messed up the 128th, who you can kind of see are pointed south. They're looking at the bridges across Cedar Creek. Thoburn, the remainder of the 8th Corps, runs away. Another Confederate division moves across in front of the 128th. At that time, the 128th actually shifts its position. They are on an island in this location, basically at the corner of the division's position, with Confederates approaching from all directions. A hasty line of Federal troops tries to stand up to Gordon's attack. They are unable to, and the Federal troops retreat to the north. That all happened before 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, this battle lasts all day long. This is the American Battlefields Trust picture of the final Federal counterattack. Sheridan finally got the line in order at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and launched an attack that drove the Confederates from the field. The story of how that happened is much longer than we have time for, but what I just went over was the story of the 128th and the 5th New York Heavy Artillery. The 159th was not very involved in this battle. They lost only a handful of men, and they retreated to the north quickly. The thing that's interesting, though, is that the spot where that star was on the map is a monument to the 128th. There are relatively few monuments on this battlefield, only 2 of them to regiments. One of them is to the 8th Vermont, the other one's to the 8th Vermont. There are a couple of others. There's one to a Confederate general that passed away. There's one to the South Carolina troops that are there. But this is the 128th's monument. This is the view from the 128th's position. They would have been looking down. This is where the old Valley Pike was. This is Highway 11. Cedar Creek is down here. They would have been looking to the crossings of Cedar Creek. After the war newspaper articles. A couple soldiers from Poughkeepsie that fought. Commander of I Company, Robert Wilkinson. He was wounded in action. This is taken at the Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery. There's a number of Wilkinsons buried there, including one of his brothers, who was also an officer in the 128th, is buried about 50 meters away. Jacob Armstrong from Hyde Park was captured at the battle. In the collections of the Historical Society, we have the diary case of Robert Sanders, who at age of 16 enlisted in D Company as a musician. And we don't have the diary, but we do have the case for it. He was wounded in action at Cedar Creek. Sanders is buried at the Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery as well. William Freer from Poughkeepsie. We have in our collection, again, thank you, Dean Thomas, we have a little daguerreotype of him. This is his grave in the Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery, and his notes about what he did in the war. And again, captured in action, Cedar Creek. The 128th lost about 75 men captured in the battle. This is perhaps the most tragic story of those that are captured. Edward Wells, again, Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery. What you see in the red box is what is on the tombstone. It's pretty self-explanatory. Captured at Cedar Creek, imprisoned in North Carolina, died 3 days after he returned home. Died in March of 1865. And Dean Thomas found a transcription of his diary from the family. And some of the selections are there. To make matters, I don't want to say worse, but he was also the subject of an article in the Rhinebeck Gazette that said he had been killed in the battle. So imagine if you're his family here reading in the newspaper that he had been killed. Now he's not killed, but dies 3 days after he returns home. This is a picture. It's a Poughkeepsie Journal article from the 10th of April, 1969, about the establishment of the monument in Poughkeepsie. Derek Brown was the president of the 128th Veterans Association that got the ball rolling on this. Derek Brown was one of 5 Brown brothers that fought in the war in the 128th. You can see the graves there of 3 of them. There's more pictures there. 3 of them are buried at Rhinebeck. A 4th is buried somewhere at Rhinebeck, but there is no stone. He's buried somewhere in this vicinity. Joseph Brown was killed at Winchester, and he's buried in the Winchester National Cemetery in an unmarked grave. And this is the Winchester Cemetery. The reason I wanted to include Brown is he gave a talk in the 1880s to the Württemberg Union Lyceum. And there he told the story of his family. Joe was killed in the first battle in which he was engaged, 3rd Winchester. In the course of the battle, we marched over his body 3 times. And then he goes on to make some conversations about his experience at Salisbury as a prisoner of war. This is William Brown's grave. He is buried. This is the Rhinebeck Cemetery, pretty close to the office. The main office is over here to the side. I realize we're right at 8 o'clock, so bear with me. I got a Nebraska story I got to tell because I'm a native Nebraskan, and heck, what's life without a Nebraska story? And the thing that's so great about this story from my perspective is that it ties into a project Bill is doing, and I didn't know that till I did this research. There are 4 veterans of the 128th that ended up going to Nebraska after the war. And I just got to track them all down. I only really started to dig into one of them, WCilroy. The reason is he went to the town of Shickley, which is a small town of about 300 people, then as now, that's only about 50 miles from my home. And when he was in Shickley, he was involved in the Shickley, Nebraska GAR. Now, this is Carolyn Schlegel, the librarian at Shickley, sent me a packet of great stuff on Milroy, and I appreciate her work and all the librarians and historians out there so much. She sent this picture. The captioning is a little bit unclear, but I believe that this gentleman on the far right is WCilroy. And I want to share with you something from Milroy. In November of 1908, he came back to Rhinebeck, which is where his family's from, to visit. And he wrote this letter to the Shickley Herald in Shickley, Nebraska. Dear sir, I will send a few lines to let my friends know I am still enjoying 3 good square meals a day and having a good time with my old friends in Rhinebeck. And I think this is a nice city and the people are as fine and as good as can be found anywhere, but give me good old Nebraska. And now talking about Rhinebeck, it takes everything they raise to make a living, but they still seem happy and contented. I wish this country was as fine as Nebraska. Then they would be the happiest people on earth, for they are so jovial and contented. So obviously he still had a fondness for Nebraska. Now, the thing I find even funnier than this is he was married to a woman by the name of Ada. Milroy died in 1905. Ada Milroy died in 1939. and her grave is in the Rhinebeck Cemetery. So I'm thinking there's a little Green Acres moment going on here, where Milroy talking about how great Nebraska is, loving the country life. But then after he died in 1915, Ada decided, nah, I'm going back to New York. And so she resides in the Milroy plot in the Rhinebeck Cemetery. Again, some of that is supposition. The dates are true. The letter is, in fact. I would like to know more of her story about how she ended up back in Rhinebeck. I'm going to go through these last slides very quickly. These are just places to visit. And again, I'm going to be turning this presentation into an article for the yearbook, and I will include these with more detail in the yearbook article to go as well. I'll leave that up for a second. Once this gets put online, you'll be able to maybe pause and take a look. There's some great locations here. At Winchester particularly, the battlefield walks are absolutely fantastic and take you with maps that show the 128th, the 5th, the 159th. They're fantastic. Fisher's Hill, much smaller in scope. Oh, didn't want to do that. But there's a couple places to visit, particularly Ramseurs Hill, which is a beautiful walk into literally a cow pasture. Clean your shoes when you're done. And then Cedar Creek, the Historical Park Center, the Battlefield Foundation, which is an affiliated a partnership they have with the National Park. Bowman's Mills Ford, a picture of it there. That's where the 5th New York Heavy Artillery was captured pretty much en masse. And the 128th Monument. Shows you there is a parking area there that you can go along. The last thing, this is the last, I promise. One of the questions that I really want to get into. Over the last few years in the United States, there's been a lot of talk about monuments and memorialization. The late 1800s and the first decade or so of the 1900s was a period of great reconciliation in the United States, when many of the monuments that are being discussed were erected. And so I've got a question that I would like to look into between what was the thought process, what were the actions involved in the dedication of a monument to the 128th New York, a Northern regiment in Virginia in 1907, and a monument to the same unit in Poughkeepsie, New York in 1908. I can't help but think that there are some fascinating considerations there. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned Jonathan Noyalis, the historian. He has done some work with memorialization and reunions and veterans groups. In his book on Cedar Creek, he has about a good 4 or 5 pages talking about the dedication of the 128th Regiment. I can't help but think there's a story there looking at how these two monuments came together. Hopefully one day I will dig into that. Thank you for bearing with me for this period of time. I realize I've gone over a few minutes. I am at your disposal to take on any questions. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen now.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
As always, very rich with historical content. And as someone commented, the narratives about the people are fascinating. And
they are, and there's so many, there's others I would have liked to include, but I think I tried to include the ones I thought were the most poignant, the most funny, the most vibrant, the most telling.